What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to an all new episode of TAETRO Talks. Thank you for joining us today on this fine Tuesday. If you don't know, we do this show every Tuesday on both my channel and 343 TV, which you can find over at youtube.com/343labs. 343 Labs and I, working together. I'm the creative director at 343 Labs, and we put together this schedule of daily live streaming of all different types of music production content, whether it's Ableton instruction or home studio focused, even some Logic shows. We're going to have a mixing show coming up. There's lots of great content up on 343 TV every single day. So besides this talk show where we either talk to an awesome guest from the industry, whether they make MIDI controllers, whether they're a straight up artist, or they do the YouTube thing like I do, our guest today is going to have a lot of really great insight. He's got a lot of really cool credits, not only with big name artists, but with brands. Works in studios, a lot of really awesome stuff. So I'm stoked to get into that conversation today. So any of you who are thinking about, building careers for yourselves in the industry, working in studios, we're going to try to demystify a lot of that business side of things today. And I think it will be a good conversation. If you think that you have friends that will benefit from listening to this interview or that will have valuable questions, or if you're going to have a valuable question, drop it in the chat. But also, on your Instagram stories, if y'all want to tag me and say, hey, watching TAETRO Talks right now, I'll go ahead and share that on my story as well. And just kind of get the word about the show out there. I think that would be great. Like I kind of alluded to earlier, we're brought to you by 343 Labs, which is an electronic music school in New York, Berlin, and online. You can take lessons from beginner, intermediate to advanced in different things like Ableton Live, all three levels, Logic, all three levels, synthesis and sound design, music theory and songwriting, all that good stuff. So don't hesitate to check out the link in the description, 343labs.com, to check out what courses we have online. So you can be anywhere in the world or in Berlin if you are there. And there's also other cool stuff in the description. You can find out more about our guests and different links that we'll talk about later. I see a few people in the chat. Right now I'm monitoring my channel's chat. So if you're over on 343 Labs channel, thank you for watching. I just forgot to pull up that chat window before we started. So I'm going to say hello to the folks in my chat really quick. Subhash, hello from Asia. Hello from California. Hello. Philo from Germany. What's going on, my friend? So Pash says TAETRO is worldwide. Not quite. I think just within 30 feet of myself. That's how my spread of famous goes. Nishark, what is going on? Welcome to the show. My mom is here. My dad is here. Very supportive parents. I wish that you would all have supportive parents as mine. Simo Fresh, what's going on? Bueno Ladley. Hello, Gabu is here. Will Joseph is here. And the famous Max Wild in the chat. Hello, Max Wild. As you follow the conversation today, feel free to jump in the chat, ask some questions, comments. If they go with the conversation, I will totally ask our guest today. But I guess without further ado, I should say hello to Sunny Place, who just joined the chat. Hello. Without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce our guest, Danny Bobby. So please join me in welcoming our guest today. Danny, welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm so stoked to have you here. I have read a lot about you. We got connected through Topliner in New York, which was this connection with 343 Labs. And you work for them, but you also do a lot of other things, which we kind of started talking about a little bit before the interview, which is funny. We're going to try to cover a lot of those things today. I don't know if we'll be able to make it through all of the things. But the one way I like to start these conversations with my guests is something, we also touched on earlier. It's how hard it is to define ourselves in what we do in this industry, no matter if you're a content creator, you're invent instruments, or you work in studios, or you're an engineer, producer. How do you define yourself in this crazy world?
If most people, if you'd ask me, I would just say a mixing engineer is my normal answer. But yeah, I also do production stuff. I also do recording stuff, do vocal production, and do studio guitar work and things. So it's really just kind of all over the place. Right now,
you're kind of a renaissance man in the studio.
Yeah, like a jack of all trades, master of none kind of deal.
Nice. I'm sure master of many.
I'd hope, but yeah, just right now I've got a little home studio deal going. I just moved to California from New York, where I had
Awesome.
like a whole separate studio. I had like a place separate from my apartment, and since coronavirus, I was not able to get as many in-person sessions, so I moved to
Sure.
just mostly virtual stuff, just like mostly Skype and everything. So since then, I realized I didn't need the studio space anymore, so I just downsized, moved the studio to my apartment, and moved out west for better quality of life.
Yeah. Is that exciting or is that a little bit of a letdown moving from like a external studio to a home studio setup?
Well, now I really like it. Like when I first got the external studio, I loved it, and I lived with roommates, and I had just like a lot of reasons to have it, and having artists over all the time and people I didn't know coming over, it just felt much better to have like a separate
For
space for
sure.
it. But now that I'm still mostly not doing a lot of in-person stuff, like only like close friends will come by. Um, yeah, it's really nice
Yeah.
having it having the home studio set up.
That's awesome. And since you brought it up, I'm kind of curious how does survival work in this time of coronavirus? Like if your whole business model, essentially as a mix engineer, producer, whatever, is like bringing people into the studio, client work that way, and that's no longer a possibility. Even with travel, if you're bringing people from out of state or wherever to come record with you, like if that's no longer an option, how have you kind of flipped it and adapted to the current situation? You said you're doing Skype stuff. I can't imagine how that
Yeah.
works.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's like the big flip was just nobody was coming in for in-person sessions anymore, but so many people were still recording themselves and still wanted to work.
Yeah.
And even people who wanted to get production done and stuff who just had like a song written on guitar chords. And so I started just doing Skype sessions and figured out there's a program called Listen To. I
Hmm.
think it's by like AudioWorks or something. But it's called Listen To. And basically you put it on like the end of your chain in whatever DAW you're using, and it'll send a feed, and you can just send them a link, and whoever you're working with can just like open up a web page and get the direct feed from your session. So it's
Amazing.
like a really easy way. If you both wear headphones, then there's no like bleed or anything back and forth, and you can just really like dial in.
That's awesome.
And I've been doing
And
that with like mostly mixing stuff, and then also doing like production for people too.
nice. That must be such a challenge to do mixing virtually. Are you able to collaborate on really the finer points of mixing? Like, is the signal good enough? I guess. Like, is the transmission full quality?
Well, yeah, there's very rarely like the plugin does a really good job. It's definitely compressing the the audio out. It's sending out like
Yeah.
a pretty crushed version of it, but not much worse than you get from like an MP3. So
Right.
it, it yeah, only like the
Good
very
enough for the session.
yeah would be able to really
Yeah,
notice a big difference there. With like the dynamics, obviously there'd be a difference, but you could definitely
for
get a
sure.
feel for the mix. Yeah.
Nice. All right, not to talk too much about the coronavirus, I'm just always fascinated by how folks are surviving in the industry, like when everything has to get flipped on its head. So that's fascinating. That's good to hear that you're able to adapt because I think a lot of people had to abandon ship and did not find ways to adapt,
Yeah.
unfortunately. So it's cool to find that you're able to do that. I guess I want to zoom out a little bit on you and your career because from what I know about your history is you kind of maybe did a traditional sort of approach and started working in studios early on and that's kind of how you got your feet wet, your toes in the water. Do you want to talk about like the beginnings of your career when you first started working in studios and gaining that experience?
Yeah, so when I was like 20, I had just graduated from like a music production program, like just a diploma, not like a full degree or anything, just like a year little
Mm-hmm.
program. And I met somebody just like through a friend in that school who ended up being the manager of Platinum in Times
Nice.
Square. And so I just applied, and I knew her, and she knew, that I did well in school, and they took me in as an intern. And I worked as an intern there for probably like a year and a half until I was hired as an assistant engineer and then engineer.
That's
And
great.
I did that for really only like another year before I realized it just was not paying all that well, and I had so many clients that I realized I could just do it on my own accord, or do just my own separate studio and make it work.
Yeah. Is it something like, so that sounds like the very traditional approach that everybody talks about. Like you get the internship at the studio, you like whatever, you pick up the trash, sweep the floors. I don't know if that's like what your
Oh yeah,
internship entailed,
get
but is that
coffee.
basically what it was?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, for a, a good like definitely at least a year and a half, I was
Nice.
doing pretty much only just going getting meals for the artists, going and getting coffee, going and getting alcohol for everybody.
Yeah.
Just yeah, the cleaning up. I would sit in on sessions and help like, plug stuff in, but not really a lot of actual assisting work.
Right. And even
For
though you weren't like at that level, you weren't, like you said, like full on assisting or hands on at all. You were just kind of like there to help with the minor things. Were you still feeling like that was, you were getting like a ton of experience that was kind of getting you ready for like the pro leagues kind of thing?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's like super valuable. Even just things like how the engineer and the other assistant engineer, like the way that they're interacting with clients, the way that they treat them, and just like everything that goes around. And then things just like the templates that they were using. I gained like just so much, just like stealing what they were giving me.
Right. Well, you get kind of like that crash course. You get that behind the scenes look. So it seems like, the internship job might not seem glamorous, but if you can at least sit in some of these sessions, you can absorb a lot if you literally
Yeah,
just.
and it's still cool getting to be in these like, especially at that time when you just get thrown into a session with like French Montana or something, and it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's really cool. It's definitely worth the experience for the knowledge too. Yeah.
Yeah, with some of the higher level artists, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but what is that relationship like between the engineers and producers in the studio and the big artist who comes in? Like what did you learn about that dynamic that you kind of brought forward with the work that you do now?
Well, really, it's like every artist is different. Some people come in with a big party. Some people bring like 50 people in there, and they want to have a good time. They want to be hyped up. They want everybody to be involved.
Yeah.
And then there are very opposite. Like they'll turn all the lights off. They'll only have a few people there. They won't even play the music out of the speakers, like headphones only. So it's like really you kind of almost like a DJ. You kind of just have to read the room and decide,
Yeah.
oh, this person is really private, really secretive, or really like internal, whereas somebody else is like a real extrovert. Then you can kind of be a little more goofy, a little more,
Yeah.
yeah.
It seems like it'd be really relationship driven.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the thing. There's so many people who can mix well, and so many people who can record well, and it's so subjective that it's rare that these artists are going to somebody because, oh, I think that they're just the best mixing engineer, period. It's like
Yep.
people work with people that they just like to be around. So it's like if
For
you
sure.
can be somebody that they want to be around, and that's going to be so much more valuable than even just little technical stuff, I guess.
Yeah, it seems like you can go and get all the technical knowledge that you want. You can do the certificate program, you can watch all the templates get loaded and all that stuff, but you got to learn the human element. It seems like
Yeah,
that is equally important.
yeah, you got to interact with people in like this very real time kind of changing way because they're
Yeah.
during get frustrated and their whole vibe is going to change, and it's like you kind of have to help
Yeah.
them get back on course and feel good about it.
Yeah. Seems like a patience game. Is
Yeah.
there a favorite record you worked on while you were there?
Oh man, probably. I mean, I wasn't the engineer on it. I was just assisting, but um, there was the French Montana verse for All the Way Up because I loved that song.
That's awesome.
And I was assisting
Yeah.
on that session.
Maybe let's break down for folks at home because I think there's a lot of roles in the studio and I think they get thrown around interchangeably like producer, engineer, mix engineer. Like what you want to break down some of the key roles like who's in the room when you're doing that verse with French Montana and engineering and then there's an engineer.
Yeah.
Who else is in the room? What's everybody's role?
So usually it's an intern, an assistant engineer, and an engineer. And an engineer is basically like the main engineer is at the helm is sitting at the computer, and the assistant engineer is just helping with everything else. So just anything that, patching cables, setting levels on the gear, just anything where you're not seated in front of the computer that needs to be done. The assistant engineer is pretty
Right.
much doing, and then the intern is
Cool.
doing anything else. Anything you like,
Anything,
somebody in
anything that you
session
need.
wants to get blunt wraps from the bodega or something, just
Yeah,
like
yeah,
anything, coffee or
for
wine
sure.
or something. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool. So you find that most of the times in these sessions, you're working mostly with like vocalists, rappers. You're getting like instrumentals. Like you're basically getting a mix of the instrumental. They're coming in laying down vocals. Like is that basically the process? Were you sitting in on any sessions where instrumentals or beats were being made? Is that process completely separate? Just a little bit of like insight behind the curtain to that.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the same thing where it depends on the person, because
Sure.
there's definitely a lot of people you would come in, like Rich the Kid is a good example of that, where we would come in and it was almost always just like a MP3 track, just like a 2-track instrumental, and he's just doing like demos over it, just like recording a verse over it and moving on, and just going and doing a bunch of those. And then we had other people where it was like there's this band Too Many Zoos. They
Mm-hmm.
were there's a lot of videos of them like playing in the subways in New York. They're like
I've
a
probably
three
seen one.
piece. Yeah, it's like this dude with this big crazy bass drum setup with like bells on it, and then like a big baritone saxophone and a trumpet. But they recorded an album with us, and it was really there was like they were all recording together on the spot, like looping in, and then they would do dubs over it. So it's like a totally opposite process than just like the 2-track and put it in. And then there's kind of
Right.
in-betweeners where people will come with a producer and they'll kind of make the beat with them, and they'll be adding stuff while the person is writing and coming out. So they're kind of like in tandem making the song together.
Wow. So it could literally be anything. You never know what you're gonna get.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a lot
That's
of
dope.
production in the studio. Like, it's definitely not just 2 tracks. There's definitely a lot of people come in and produce in the studio, and yeah.
Nice. That sounds really fun. That sounds like a fun environment to be in.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you talked about the pay not being so high and like building relationships to kind of do it on your own. Um, do you see like is the industry moving that way almost, especially now? I'm thinking that nobody's going to real studios anyway. Everybody's doing remote work. Like
Oh yeah.
it seems like if the studios can't keep up with paying the folks who are in there, and if the relationships are being built with the person, they can just go anywhere and bring their relationships with them.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem. Is before the industry was based on really the gear and the technology, because it was so sought after, so hard to get, and so expensive, and only some people
Right.
had it and knew how to use it. And now everybody can get stuff that's like really high quality. Like I've got the Apollo 8. I mean, this thing's still kind of
Yeah.
expensive, but I mean, compared to like for what it does, compared to like what an 8-track would have costed, it's ridiculous how affordable it
For
is.
sure.
And just like anybody can use something like this, anybody can learn it, and it's yeah, there's no reason you can record on your own. You can get like a decent room set up, get a nice mic, and you can record on your own and just send it to somebody to get mixed or anything. And like the human element of having the session together is still important, but the yeah, the industry is always like, I think it's much more reliant on the person itself, on the relationship, than on the studio. Like people are gonna go
Right.
with the engineer. They don't care about the stuff that's at the studio.
Totally. And it seems like the person who finds the stuff most important is the actual engineer or whatever. And if it's as accessible as you say now, which let's get into that whole aspect of gear. I know a lot of the audience is super into
Yeah.
gear. Do you want to maybe talk about some of the main pieces in your home studio, like that you're using to do like super high quality work, but from
Yeah, so basically it's really not much. I just ate that I just run anything in, like anything that I'm going audio. And then I got like this that I'll use, like really I just like the Apollo pre's amp if I just want to like beef something up a little bit. And then besides that, I have these nice focals that I love. Um,
monitors?
yeah, these nice focals. and there's really not much else. I have like some synths, just instruments, like synths. I have my Ableton Push and all that. But as far as like actual mixing recording gear, it's really just the Apollo, and I have a U87.
Awesome. It's very, very minimal. It seems like um, it is super accessible. That's of course all high end gear, but nothing that like somebody who super aspired to it couldn't get. Are you doing any mixing on headphones or mostly all speakers?
Mostly speakers. I use SonarWorks. It's like that room correction software where
Right.
you take like a reference mic and you can record the all like the you measure your room basically, and it tells you where your boosts are, I guess. And it puts like a corrective EQ to filter over it to kind of cancel out the all like the negative nodes in your room.
Sure.
Um,
Let's talk about that. Let's get into that room treatment for the home studio. In addition to the sonar works, what are you doing to treat the room in general so that you're accurately hearing what you want to hear? Like, are you calibrating your monitors in the traditional way, panels, things like that?
yeah, well, I have just a few acoustic panels that I made, just like 2x4s filled with rock wool, and like just some old bass traps that I've had put around in the corners. But besides that, it's really not all that treated in here. In my old studio. I went really hard going for just trying to treat it as well as I could. And it was a
Sure.
really small space, but I just did the best I could and made like a ton of bass traps. And the end result was almost too dead. And I realized that it's kind of impossible to get a room that small to sound perfect through just acoustic treatment alone. Like
Right.
if you're gonna rely on just treating your room, then it's got to be like you got to be blessed with a well-shaped room, a room that has
Sure.
good dimensions for it. Because if you're in just a big square, then it doesn't no matter how many bass traps you put up, it's always going to kind of suck. It's going to
It's
get
all
phasey.
parallel lines. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's where something like SonarWorks is like super helpful because it doesn't matter if you have a shitty room, you can just record it, and it's not going to fix it, but you're going to hear a lot clearer. It's not going to be
That's
tripping
great.
as much. Yeah.
Yeah, and what's your process for like checking mixes? Like, are you doing like basically if it sounds good on your system, or is it like are you going out and give it a second listen in the car, give it a second listen on the AirPods? Like, are you cross-checking between like common like listening devices, or are you pretty? Is it set up so that your system, if it sounds good, it'll
I
sound
mean,
good across
I
it
am
all?
pretty like confident in my system that it tends to translate well, especially with like SonarWorks and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I definitely always check mixes. I check them like just straight out of the iPhone speaker first is like my always first test because if your vocal isn't like strong and on top out of your iPhone, then it's like there's a big problem. And
Sure.
then besides that, yeah, I check in the car. I check on AirPods. Yeah.
Nice. We had a guest on, I forget which guest it was in particular, but they talked about uh, the bathroom check that if they kind of were finished with a track and then they went over and they went to the bathroom and all the doors were closed and they could listen to the track through all the walls and it still sounded good, they were like, okay, it's fine. It's
That's
the
really
bathroom
funny.
check.
I actually do
Yeah.
the same thing. I didn't think about that, but I just step right outside my door and hear it from outside the door. And yeah, if it sounds right, then I'm happy with it. That's really funny. I do the same thing. I never even realized it. It's kind of like a neurotic thing I do.
Sure. That's so funny. Um, let's this of what you're doing from home and how you're working with clients so that maybe folks, I'm thinking about the folks at home, maybe I have this for a job one day. Maybe I could build towards this at some point. So bring me from start to you, what are they sending you? What are you doing with what they're sending you? And then what's like the process back and forth, like
Yeah. Okay. So I'll do.
the life of a project, I guess.
Yeah. So I'll for one I did recently, basically, this artist, he he plays the guitar, and he had basically a song written where he just had his vocals and he had a little guitar loop, and he just recorded the guitar himself, and then he recorded the vocal track over me and just sent me those two tracks basically. And then so we join in just like over Skype or over Zoom, whatever they want to do, and it really doesn't matter because I'm not sharing audio through streaming media. So
Right.
then I just share my screen, pop it into like a pro, and send him that audio through the listen to program. Um, and then we'll just start, and they're just like, hey, what do you hear for it? Like, what kind of sounds do you think would sound good, or if he has any references or anything. And then we'll just go at it. Like for this one, we ended up just taking the guitar out and just using it as like a bass reference for the rhythm and the melody. And then I
Sure.
just like played in some new chords behind him and started just like fleshing it out that way. We get some like synth chords with Serum and have him pumping, and then move on to drums and just like have him there every step of the way.
So you're doing the whole production session. No, this is not just a mixing session. This is like full on
Yeah, this
production
is start.
session.
Yeah, so we'll do the whole production just like that, and come up with something that we like, and then we'll do another session, and then we'll like start actually.
Sure. And how separate are those processes? Are those is that across multiple sessions? Is that across a single session? How long is that session? All
Yeah,
that.
I mean, really, it's varied depending on how like complex the song is, I guess. But it's I mean, it's never one session. It's always two, because like if I'm producing something especially, then after a few hours of producing, then I gotta step back, or
You have
else
to refresh your.
yeah, let my ears adjust.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Give it a
Yeah.
few hours or give it a day, rest on it, and start again. Yeah, but it's pretty much always
Totally.
two sessions, and sometimes just the mixing.
Yeah. You've talked about being involved in a few different genres. Are there genres you're more comfortable with? Are you pretty, or do you feel like it's important, I guess, for folks that want to pursue a similar role to be kind of fluent across different styles, or should people be honing in on a single style or a certain selection of styles? What do you suggest for that?
I think yeah, there's probably it's hard to be able to be great at all of them, because
Right.
mixing for rock music or like indie music is going to be like so vastly different from like the pop world.
Yeah.
Um, Not that you can't do it, and I know people who are great at both of them, and I think I can do it. But it's definitely I lean more towards like the pop, hip hop, EDM kind of thing.
Sure.
Um, just pop mostly, and just everything revolves around the subwoofer in hip hop. It's all about the sub bass and 808s and drums and everything to just hit really hard, and that's very different from if you're mixing like regular country pop or something like that.
Sure.
But now with like modern pop music now is very similar to like the mixing with hip hop, and
It's all blending together now,
yeah, it's all really heavy.
gradually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always think about that because like when dubstep was first happening, I'm like, all right, what's the first song I'm gonna hear? Like it's a normal pop song but has dubstep elements. And now, like I think back then to that, and now it's like then there was Chainsmokers, and then there was like everything. Like modern pop music is basically just turned into like this branch off of EDM somehow,
Yeah.
and even like hip hop sort of went that way. It's
Yeah.
um I a little bit of your mixing process for sure, and what some of the tools are, what some mixes that you're getting. Like I'm thinking from an artist perspective, right? They're sending you their stuff and they want it to be mixed. Are you seeing a lot of common, I don't want to say mistakes, but a lot of common things that you have to go in and fix when you're getting a recording from different artists? Are common things that people should avoid?
Yeah. Like a lot of I'd say the most common problem, especially in hip hop more than anything else, is usually not as much of a problem in softer genres or even just like pop, but hip hop especially, but really everywhere. The main problem I get is vocals that are just clipping. Is vocals that are just recorded too hot, either clipping
Yeah,
or just really close to clipping, where they're just it's just too hot. You
not enough headroom.
yeah, people. I think one thing that especially if you're recording by like at home, people maybe don't know is just turn the beat way down. Is if you're just loading your beat in, you're loading your 2 track in, and having it hit at 0, and then you're trying to record vocals over that, you're not gonna be able to hear yourself, and you're gonna naturally want to gain, and then you're gonna clip your vocals. So just turn your beat way down, like a good 4 or 6 dB, and record to it that way, and keep your vocal a little less aggressive with the gain.
For
I
sure.
I think less is more is the way to go with that stuff, especially with like modern condensers and preamps. You're so sensitive, you really don't need all that much gain.
Diversity of artists that you work with and everybody recording at home, how important is like, of course, I think the microphone's like, I'm sure stuff that's recorded on a middle like range microphone to expensive to lower range. Like, how important is that you're getting? Do you notice differences, and are you able to sort of bring out the best qualities of almost any mic?
Yeah, and almost kind of genre specific too, where
Okay.
like for like say if you're making pop music, like you want a song to sound like a top 40 Billboard pop song, like it's going to be really hard to really clean, clear, bright pop vocal out of like $100 mic. But
Right.
if you're doing like aggressive hip hop that's distorted or aggressive rock music that are more distorted or just is supposed to be dirtier, I guess, then yeah, I wouldn't say it's crazy important to have like a really expensive condenser. I mean, especially not if you're yelling or doing something aggressive. You're better off with just like a
Sure.
stage mic, just like a regular 58 or something. Um, yeah,
Really?
yeah. I mean, if you're like really yelling aggressively into the mic or something like that, like screamo stuff,
Yep.
condenser is not your friend. You're just gonna drive right through it. Just like a regular stage mic will do you. But yeah, it's
Totally.
I think I branched off. I forgot what the original question was now.
No, we were just talking. Like, I think you answered it well. Like how much it really matters. I think the
Yeah,
genre specific thing is important for folks to know.
yeah. That's the thing. It can be important to have like a nice, but you don't have to spend $7,000 on like a Neumann or something. There's great mics that you can get for under $1,000, but want that nice, clean and clear pop sound. You should treat your room well so you're not getting a bunch of reflections. You should get a nice, good, sensitive mic. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, what is the mixing? I don't know if you've remixed you're working on, or if just every mix is so unique. Like, are you doing stuff like, I don't know, maybe you can just break down the process, and is there a standard, recipe are following? Maybe for a specific genre, like say a hip hop genre or something like that, where we're getting the whole project and you got to mix. What's your kind of procedure? What's the recipe for making that sound good? What steps are you taking?
Well, basically, I'm like, so hopefully the files are organized. Like hopefully that's another thing when people send files is that hopefully they're organized where I have like lead and these are backgrounds, these are doubles, and so that I just know what everything is supposed to be. Because that could be confusing. You just get a
Yep.
track and there's just a bunch of layers, and you're like, you're not sure what's supposed to be the lead and what's supposed to be behind, and then you have to kind of go through every single track and figure it out for yourself. It just adds like a ton more work, and you're not even sure if you're going in the direction that the artist wants. So that's I think is important when you're sending files too, is just make sure you label them right. But yes, that's
Yeah.
how I'd really start out. Is just like whatever the lead is, especially if it's like vocal dominant. I'll find all the vocals where they're together and kind of give like a rough blend of like lead and back. And then I will usually just turn them off. I'll just mute all the vocals and I'll just start with beat and I'll start on like just the sections. So like drums, I'll go all the way from like the bottom to the top. So I'll start with like kick sound good with the bass. Okay, that sounds good.
And what does that mean? Break down that and the kick sound good with the bass. What does that mean for the folks at home?
Yeah. So basically just making sure it's not like 808 and the kick are just like pounding through, making sure that they blend well. So I like to do like sidechain compression and stuff sometimes, or even just like little EQing out of the way for frequencies that are clashing. Like if your kick drum is hitting really hard at 60 hertz, also hitting really hard at 60 hertz, then you, you
Get them out of the way.
something needs to happen there to get them to not just slam together. Um, yeah, and that's so basically just way to blend in a way that they can sound like as big and loud as they can be without blasting away all your headroom. It's
Sure.
just like safe space saving techniques. I can't talk.
Yeah. What are some of those space-saving techniques? Because you want your kick to hit, cut through. You want your 808s to be big and boomy. Like, is it really? Are you just carving out a little section there for that kick to peek through the 808, or are you doing any kind of side chaining at all to make sure the
Yeah,
kick cuts through?
really, that's another. It's like it also depends on the kick, and really a really clicky kick and like a really thumpy subby 808, and like the kick is peaking at like 100 hertz, and then the fundamental frequency for your 808 is like way lower, like 50 or something. Then that
Yeah.
you usually don't need to. You can kind of take care of that. Just like carve out a little spot for
Yep.
that kick to sit in your But yeah, if they're both thumping, if you have like a really bassy thumpy kick, and then you also have that big subby 808, then some sort of side chain come out of the way.
Right.
So just whenever you kick the compressor on the 808 and just like duck it for a second to save that space. Because it's all about getting that space to be able to hit and be able to sound big and good, but without. Because if you're just leave it right on top of each other, both of those 60 hertz, then you're like leaving really no room for anything else in your mix. It makes it really hard to then mix up your vocals and mix up the rest of your drums and everything. Yeah.
Totally. All right. Well, we got as far as the bass and the drums. What comes next?
Yeah. Well, like bass and drums, and then just like setting the level of the snare. So like then I have, okay, this is where the kick and 808 are gonna sit. And then bringing in hi-hats and just like all of the rest of the drums, like so that they all sound good relative to each other, you know. And then I'll bring in.
So you got to make sure you're getting stems of like the whole kit, like tracked out. You're not getting like a single like file for a drum kit or something like that. You're getting every stem.
Like I will sometimes do like just vocal mixes for people over like 2-track instrumentals, but I like to like make it really clear that it's like only so much I can do like to a 2-track. If I'm like sent like a 2-track instrumental that's just like slammed, or even if it's not totally slammed, but just the way it's mixed is set in stone, and then I can't really fit in where I would want to put in the vocal into the mix. It's just going to end up always being kind of on top.
Yeah.
There's like situations where people have just sent me really great mixes for their 2-track, and it works. But I'd still, even in that case, I'd much rather have the control to be able to do things like sidechain to like a certain element of the song. Because sometimes I'll take like the vocal and sidechain it to like a lead that's in the background of a beat or something to make that lead not clash with it so hard. So yeah, it's definitely important to have all the stems.
Very cool. I interrupted you. We were going through your process again, and we still haven't made it through the song.
I think I got through drums. Yeah. So we get the drums, and then so all my levels are just like set relative to each other, because that's really all mixing is about, because it's all just relative to each other. So next I'm bringing in like all the musical elements. If there's like guitars and everything, I'll group all the guitars together. So everything like should be treated similar, I'll put together. So I'll put all the guitars together. I'll put like pads together. I'll put like things that are more plucky, or like things that are more staccato and not drawn out. I'll put them together. Just like anything I can categorize these things to separate them, then I'll put them in their own like group, in their own aux, and then I can affect them all separately.
Sure.
So instead of trying to go in and like move all of these elements down, let's be like, oh, I'll just brighten all the guitars, or I'll just darken all the plucks. Just like makes easing way simpler, way quicker, and like visually it makes it so much easier for you, because you're just saying, oh, just push this whole thing down, push this whole group down. Okay.
Right. Is there this process? Well, I'm sure there is, but like you're putting the things into groups, and you're kind of changing their character based on like how they all fit together. Are there instances, or is there part of this process where you're not just changing the general character of the individual sounds and the individual parts, but you're changing them over time? So maybe, the guitars, we want the guitars super bright here in this verse, but as we grow it into the chorus and beyond, like we want to kind of darken them a little bit here and then make them bright. Like, are you doing that over time?
Yeah. That's usually like the end stage of the mix, is all like the automation stuff, is anything that's like, oh, I think this should move over time. That's usually like stuff that I go and pass through all that stuff at the end. Like basically what I like to do is I like to start portion of the song. I should have started here. But this is
Okay.
I like to start it like so whatever is like the
You mean like most dense, like the
yeah
most things happening?
yeah so like the last chorus or something. So whatever is like the biggest part of the song, the densest part of the song, I'll take that. So I'll start with like the whole process that I was explaining with going from the drums ground up and then bringing in instruments, and then after that I'd bring in the vocals
Yep.
and just like all that. That would all be in like the biggest section of the song because that's I'm trying to mix it like as clean and as big as possible for that section. So then once you move into like the smaller sections, then you have like so much more room in those sections since you've been mixing for the top, you know?
Right. Not to continue to just interrupt this whole process, which is great. But a question from Max Wild in the chat was, do you prefer working with stems or do you prefer working with the actual session in the original
I actually
DAW?
prefer stems.
It seems like working with somebody's project in the DAW would be a nightmare, especially if it
Yeah.
wasn't your own project.
Yeah, because you have all this routing going on and you don't know where it's going and
Right.
you don't know what things are labeled. And then just the possibility that you don't share the same plugins. Yeah, I definitely like everything just stems I'd much rather prefer. And as far as vocals, I prefer everything raw too. Like obviously if you have effects and stuff on your instrumental stems, that's part of the production. You don't want to
Right.
um,
But for a
let
vocal
that
track, you just want the raw, like no effects,
Yeah, I just
nothing.
want it raw. And if you have like time-based effects like cool delay, echo stuff, like that stuff I would want as stems too, but separate from the track. As long as it's separated. As long as you can like, get
Sure.
an effects track if you want to keep those effects, but as long as like the vocal itself is still raw and dry. Yeah.
And I wonder, does your mindset change when you are mixing a track that you produced, or like you know that you're going to be producing and mixing the track? So I feel like with other people's stuff, you're like, okay, like obviously I just want the stems. I don't want to deal with any of your process. I can just take what you have and mix from there. But when you're a producer, you always have, well, it could go back and change this, or I could go back. Like, is there a change in mindset there, or are you very strict with it, even if you're the producer, where it's like, when we're done with the production session, exporting, and now I'm just working with the stems, or do you have a little more leeway with yourself?
Well, it kind of a little bit of both, where I definitely oh, sorry.
It's okay.
I'm drawing a blank.
No, it's okay. I think it's tough because like there is the whole thing of like the mixing process, and for me, like I'm just totally like a home studio thing, like one-stop shop for myself, right? So I always like it's always like not nerve-wracking, but like, because you're like, well, then I won't be able to like, well, you
Yeah.
don't need to change this or that. You just need to
Yeah.
accept it,
Oh, yeah,
you know?
that's what I was gonna say. Because most of the sessions like if we're doing production, I'll start them out in Ableton, and I'll just be working mostly in Ableton, and I'll print all my stems by the time we're ready to like mix in the vocals and stuff. Then I'll print that all out and I'll bring it into Pro Tools.
Right.
Sometimes I'll start in Pro Tools and I'll like switch in between, and I'll just like make a little melody in Ableton and print it out. But that's most of the time once I've moved on into the mixing phase, like I'm not cut off from doing more production. It's just moved to like audio only. So it's like I'm
Right.
printing everything, and if I'm gonna add something, it's gonna be audio. Like it's gonna be I'm playing guitar in, or I'm manipulating the audio in some way. But yeah,
Got
so I'm
it.
definitely still doing production stuff, but it's pretty much all audio. I'm not really working with MIDI after that point.
Sure. So you draw on that line in the sand, and even if you have to add something, you're printing it to audio and putting it in the session that way.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Cool. There's another question in the chat from Bradley, like asking for a little explanation of what you mean when you say two track. So like when you explained that whole thing of like
Oh,
you get a vocalist and they just have a two track. Like what does that mean?
oh yeah. So a two track is just like an MP3 file or a WAV file. It's called a two track because it holds two channels of audio, so you can put it
Right.
into like a stereo audio track in your DAW. It's confusing because people think of it as like one track, but it's one stereo track, which is
Right.
like two mono tracks panned left and right. It's
Yeah. Another question from the chat is, because you talked about wanting the separate reverbs and delays and all that. Are there instances where you get those, but then you maybe end up adding in your own reverb and delays and kind of not using what got sent your way?
Yeah, like especially if it's just like a hall reverb that's just over the whole vocal, like something like that. I'll usually just mute it, and I'll usually just add in my own reverbs. Um,
Yeah.
but if it's like a delay swell or something, like if it's like a creative effect, then that I'm printing and I'm leaving, and I can like sometimes I'll manipulate those a little bit, like EQ them or something. But um, yeah, for the most part, I will keep stuff that's like creative effects. But as far as just like, oh, this is supposed to be just like a hall reverb or something or a slapback delay,
Yep.
I'll usually cut that stuff and just recreate it.
Cool. Is that so that you can have a little more control, or you just like the sound of the stuff you use over whatever you're getting?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. Like, I mean, there are instances where I have just left the verb because I just thought it sounded really good.
Mm-hmm.
But it's usually because I want a little more control, being able to like maybe change the decay time and stuff like that, or yeah,
Nice.
or in like the grouping and stuff. But I guess it works with audio as well. Yeah.
Sure. You want so it does sound like you are mostly an in the box kind of guy.
Yeah.
Is that accurate to say, would you say?
Stuff. I used to be like really into uh, looking for new gear, but I really think um, like especially in the last 4 or 5 years, how great the technology has gotten, especially even in like plugins and stuff. Like the Fab Filter is so accurate and so easy to use. And then
Yes. You're bringing it the direction I want to go. Tell me all the magic stuff going to for like pretty much every product.
yeah, but always standard is like a bunch of Fab Filter stuff. So like Fab Pro Q3 and Pro C and yeah, there's got to be, they have the gate I like to use a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just like any dynamic effect, compression or EQ, any dynamic effect where I'm just trying to like actually like fix the audio, I guess.
Yeah.
That's like Fab Filter is my go-to for all. I think of
And tell me what's so great and rave about Fab Filter. Not to say do a commercial, but like what's so great about it? Like what brings it to the next level in comparison to other plugins for you and your ears?
it's really just like it's the actual like interface. It's how easy it is to use, like the user interface. It's
Mm-hmm.
the analyzer for one is like super accurate, more so than like any other EQ I've seen, where you can like change the I don't know the like the it's like the scale, so you can like kind of look deep
Got it.
into the EQ, I guess, so you can like see the peaks
Yeah.
even tightened. So you can change the scale and you can like get really tight and see into your frequencies, and then you can. It's basically a system where you can just like click and drop a band, and it's just endless. So it's not like you're limited to 8 bands. You just an endless amount of points that you can add, and you can have like 50 points on one little curve that you're trying to do. It's just like it gives you too much control, basically. Yeah.
Sure. You want to give me an instance where you're like maybe exerting a little bit too much control on an audio track, like something where you would have maybe not 50 bands, but something like if somebody opened the project file, they'd be like, a crazy person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like just like shelf something a little bit where I should have just
Mm-hmm.
used a shelf EQ, but instead I've like put on a filter and then I've
You went through
25
one by one until
points
it
trying to
became a
level it
shelf.
out. Yeah. It's trying to get it to like even flat down here before 200 hertz, and then have it like kind of come back up at 200. It's like I could have done that with a shelf, but
Yep.
yeah. But that's it's just you can like make any curve you want with it, and it's super easy to see what you're doing because the analyzer makes it like accurate too.
Nice.
And
Um,
the
oth-
Pro C.
yeah, let's talk a little bit more. Other than Fab Filter, you said Pro C?
Yeah, I mean that's also Fab Filter, just like all the Fab Filter stuff. They're like
Right.
their compressors and stuff too. I'll use for like my side chaining and all that. Anything that's like dynamic tools, and then for like creative effect stuff like reverbs and delays and saturation and that kind of stuff, I like Sound Toys is really my favorite for all that stuff.
Nice. What particular plugins from Sound Toys? If you had to name a few, I
Like
guess.
decapitator, I use very often on like drums and on bass and anything that I feel like needs a little grit and needs to darken up a little bit. I really like it for like
Sure.
it has that little brightness darkness knob, and you can just take something like a whole set of guitars and give them a little drive and decapitator, and then just like make it a little dark, slide it into the dark, and then it's basically just like a tilt. It's like a EQ tilt where it shifts the whole frequency towards the back end. So it's just stuff like that. It's super useful for making stuff heavy. uh,
Absolutely.
what else from Sound Toys? Echo
That's
Boy. Echo Boy is like my go-to delay.
oh nice.
Yeah.
That's great. And you just become super familiar with these tools, and I think that's the thing about it too. If you find something that like think sounds really good and you get super comfortable with it, it becomes your go-to. I think a lot of us have a tendency to try the new thing and the next thing, and let's try something different. But it seems like, especially for you and the work you're doing, you got to find the tools. Like you don't got to go buy a new screwdriver every time they put a new screwdriver out. You know, you have your
It's yeah.
screwdriver that you like
And
because
that's
it
why like
works, and that's
I
what you
think of
use.
all that stuff as like my like toolbox. Like that's like the dynamic tools for fixing stuff. And then there's the whole other lane of like, you know, VSTs and things that are just more creative plugin for production than the mixing and technical side, I guess. Yeah, yeah, less of a I don't know. It's more creative, I guess. Yeah.
That was about I'm sure it's different for each instance, but are you mostly putting things at the on the sends or on the tracks themselves, a little bit of both, and maybe explain situations where you would do one way or
Yeah,
the
that's a
other?
good one actually, because basically pretty much any dynamic effect like EQ or compression, um, just like what I was talking about before, anything that's like I'm just trying to control the audio, that I'm doing all on the track for the most part. If I have like a group of something like a group of guitars, sometimes I'll do all that stuff together just over the group. But for the most part, I'm doing all that stuff by the track. And then time-based effects like reverbs and delays, I'm doing all that stuff on sends. That's kind of my rule of thumb. I mean, I know people who do it differently, but yeah, that's pretty much how I always do it. Is time-based effects are on sends and dynamic effects are straight on the track or on groups.
Nice. And what's the sends?
It just makes it easier to like work with and blend with, so you're not just like you don't have to go in and change the mix knob on every single one of your tracks to try to get it to sound like all your backgrounds moved out further or something. You can
Yeah,
just like take your reverb send and just jack it up. Whereas like with dynamic stuff, you want it to just be one thing. You know, you just want one fader that you can bring up and down for the level of the track because you're not
sure.
like unless you're doing parallel compression and you're trying to blend it in. But yeah, it's kind of a special case.
Awesome. We have gone deep into this world, which I'm so excited about. I hope folks in the chat are enjoying the conversation. I do want to talk about. I want to, we went really deep and super like into pro mode, and because you're obviously working on like pro sessions and stuff like that, I do want to talk a little bit about like for folks who maybe don't have any fancy gear, maybe don't have any fancy plugins, maybe they've just got their DAW and what's stock with them. Before we a little bit about Topliner, because I know you work with Topliner, and maybe you can, because I've got a link in the description for folks who are watching. But if you Topliner, it seems like you guys have like a really amazing community going on. Do you want to just give like the elevator pitch for Topliner and what you
Yeah,
do with
yeah.
them?
So Topliner is a it started I think 4 years ago or so, and in New York, and basically what you do is we get like 10 teams together, of like five or I think it's like 4 or 5 people, and it's usually artists, producers, engineers, anybody who has like or singers, just like anybody who has value into the music making can join, and basically they get like divided into groups based on their roles. So they'll try to put like a producer and a songwriter and a singer and a engineer in every group, and have
Building
them work
teams.
together. Yeah, and they'll like do these little meetups throughout the weeks and like come up with a song, and then they go to the judges for or like the instructors will help them guide them like oh how they can make this better for next week and stuff. So it's just like a little camp to try to every group basically gets like a finished song at the end of it.
Yeah.
And and basically my role in that is I'm working as a mixing engineer for them. So any in the previous camps, I would basically when the teams would be done with their songs, they would come in for a mixing session with me, and then I would rough mix over it for a few hours and like guide them on how they could better on their own before like the
Right.
final judging. And then yeah, at the end there's like we have a big finale where get like industry judges and stuff to come down and listen to all the songs and basically like a winner is awarded for there's like a lot of awards are given out too for
Nice.
different
Well,
accolades. Yeah.
it just seems like a great community connection point. And I know that they're doing beat battles too, because I'll be judging the October 29th beat battle, which is super exciting.
Oh yeah.
And folks who are like interested in everything you just talked about, and like I'm sure it looks a little different now because of the situation we're all in, but you should at least check out the Topliner
Yeah.
website to see how you can get involved, because a lot of stuff is digitally would seem like you don't necessarily have to be in New York to get involved and to make connections, build a community, learn some stuff.
I'm also doing mixing through the book me through that
Awesome.
website, and that's basically right now because we're not in camp stuff. I think they're moving to more of this virtual lane too. So yeah, there's definitely
Nice.
still a lot to be done.
All right, so check out the Topliner website. The link is in the description. You can book your and then connect to the community that way. I think that's pretty cool. All right, you kind of touched on it when we were talking about Topliner, but you talked about like workshopping people's mixes, showing them what they can do to kind of make it better on their own. Let's go like we zoomed in on the professional level for like your process and what you do and working with big artists and clients. What can the home studio music producer who's just working on their own in their DAW, don't have too many plugins, don't have a huge budget, what advice can you give to them to get like really decent sounding professional mixes with what they've got?
Yeah, well, I really don't think you need that much, especially for mixing. Like from what everything I'm using for my mixing is pretty much all in the box. All in the box. I have like some UAD plugins that I use that you need like a UA for, but besides that, it's all pretty much in the box. So as long as you have even stock, even like you can just take a stock Ableton without any of the extra plugins, without any like VSTs, and you could still make really good stuff. It's all about just your arrangement and stuff. I think a lot of things that producers do early is they try to just endlessly fill their songs to the brim. They're making beats or making songs. They're just like, okay, I added this, just keep adding another thing, and they just keep adding stuff and adding stuff when they should just be taking those few elements and sound as good as they can. And in the end, if you have 4 elements like drums, bass, a guitar, and a vocal, and all of them sound really big and good, then it's going to sound a lot better than if you have like 20 different layers of a pad that you're throwing in. Because like in your mind, you're thinking, oh, it's going to sound really huge. I'm putting in like 20 layers. But in the end, it doesn't work that way. It's you're like tricking your brain into thinking it's big. And really, it's just like all of the congestion of that mix is making it sound really small and constricted. So it's that.
Yeah, especially as folks like making beats and like instrumentals that they expect to have a vocalist on. I find that people way too often are just like have the busiest arrangement going on, like so many parts. It's okay, but where would a vocalist even fit on this?
Yeah, and again, having like a bunch of arps going on in the background, and then also having like a lead on top of that arp, and then like flutes, and it's just like there's like fill the mix really big, and it would be cool. But that's a big part of it is also having it shift, is being able to have parts that are low and soft that don't have a lot going on, and moving those into parts where there's more going on. Because I'm going from like a thing to a bigger thing, then you're just not going to have that energy, and it's as appealing.
Sure. Yeah, totally. Are there like sound design like rules that like folks should just follow? Like get low end out of things that don't have any low end, or that don't need any low end, like basic compression, like compress everything at a certain level, or like whatever. Like are there any like things that you would just recommend people do all the time?
I think what I always like to say, like what my real ethos is now, you only do something if there's intent behind it. So if you want to compress something, you ask yourself why. Like, why do I want to compress this? And if you can't think of a reason, then don't compress it. Like if you want to compress something, it should be because you want to like fit it into a space, or maybe you want the actual sound, you want the effect of something that sounds hard compressed. But otherwise, if your level,
Sure.
like if you crank something out of a VST, like a VST synth, like say you have massive or serum and you have a synth and you play something and it's just like stock 100 velocity. If you put a compressor on that, you're not going to do anything. You're just like shrinking the top of it because that signal has no dynamics. Like the only purpose for your compressor is manipulating those dynamics. So if it's just a block of waveform, then you don't need compression on it, you know?
Got it.
Same thing with EQ. Move to EQs that you see people do or that you think you're supposed to do. It's like if it doesn't sound good, and if you're going to do something, if you're going to compress something or EQ it, then you just have to have a reason for it. You have to be like, oh, I need room for this. I need space for this. So I should do this.
I think a lot of that, like what you're mentioning, it's so interesting how much doesn't come down to like the technical, like plug in, like clicking on the screen level, but a lot of it comes down to like straight up using your ears. And, you know, I think about like having gone to like a traditional music program, you did a lot of ear training where you're learning about intervals and things like that. But from a mixing and sound design and engineering, there's another level of ear training that has to go on. I wonder if maybe you can talk a little bit about, not super in depth, but how have you trained your ears over the years to fully understand like what does a sound need? Like, is it about like having these awesome reference tracks that you constantly go back to and say like, yeah, the guitar sounds like this in that track and I kind of want to like emulate that style. Why does it sound like that? How does it sound like that? Like, how did you train your ears on an engineering and mixing level?
Yeah, I mean, definitely like that is part of it. Like just listening to songs I really love or songs I grew up a lot, and just trying to figure out why I like it so much. Like there's this System of a Down album, Toxicity,
Of
and
course.
I loved that album as a kid, and like I've gone back to it a bunch of times in my life and been able to realize now like the reason I like it so much is because like the dynamics in it are so incredible, because it moves from like this really soft, small, like pretty place with these like bright acoustic guitars and like really soft like chimes and stuff, and then he'll just like boom 180 and just like hard slam into giant wall of guitars and like big drums. It's just like
Yes.
stuff like that. So it's and over the years you just realize I never I never like set out to train my ears. I was never like, okay, I want to make my ears better. But if you're tweaking EQs enough, basically, you're just gonna like you're gonna know what 100 hertz sounds like. If you're
Yeah.
doing it enough and you push at 100 hertz and go, oh yeah, if this is 100 hertz, that's my problem. Like if you do that for years, you're gonna be able to know. Like somebody will say 100 hertz and you'll hear it. You'll be like, oh, I know what
That's
that
funny.
sounds. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's yeah.
I think we all aspire to be at that level. And with you bringing up System of a Down, like, do you find this? I find that like a lot of the music I listened to when I was younger, like rock music, pop music, whatever it was, like music that I was super into, I go back and listen to it now, having some music production experience, and say, I really love this because this production is amazing.
Oh
But when
yeah.
you're a kid, you like don't know that, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I'm realizing, oh, that's why I love this. And then there's
Yeah,
other
it's
songs you go back to and you're like, my God, this mix is horrible.
exactly, yes.
Yeah.
It's so funny. Well, Danny, you've brought us from Rich the Kid to System of a Down. I think, we've kind of covered it all to a certain point. I want to thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. I hope community folks in the chat, I hope you all really enjoyed this conversation. This interview will be up on my channel and then on 343 Labs channel for you all to watch later. Eventually, I'll get it into a podcast feed so you can take it on the go. But if you missed the beginning, feel free to rewind and watch. Danny, anything you would like to shout out before we completely sign off here?
I guess just another shout out for Topliner Camp. Put me up on their website. So if you guys want to check it out, or if you want to book me, you can get me there. It's mytoplinercamp.com. Yeah, but besides that, nothing much.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me, dude. This was great. I was worried
Yeah,
to be able to talk for this long, but you made me very
we
comfortable.
got
So
it. Yeah, awesome. I'm glad that that worked out. But yeah, you folks can check out that link in the description for Topliner. You can book Danny. You can check out all the cool stuff that they have going on. While you're in the description, don't forget to check out the link for 343 Labs, 343labs.com, because if you're interested in just learning the basics of music production, whether you're working in Ableton or Logic, or you want to learn more about mixing and learning more about synthesis, music theory, all that good stuff, you should check out the courses that we have for beginner, intermediate, advanced. 343labs.com. Link is in the description. Spend some time down there, browse around, and at least let us know what you think, even if you're not going to take a course. Danny, thank you again so much for being on. It was great having you.
yeah, thank you, man.
All right, awesome. Thanks everybody for watching. This has been TAETRO for another episode of TAETRO Talks. Tune in next week and tune in tomorrow for Home Studio. I think they're talking about distortion tomorrow, so that should be a fun one on 343 TV.